Good morning, everybody. This is Maddie here with Food Power. Thanks for joining the webinar this morning. We've got a nice group of people with us who have joined us. Just to make sound is working, as we like to do at the beginning of this. If you see there's an attendee chat box on the left-hand side of your screen, if you could just say hello and where you're listening in from to let us know that you can hear me, that would be great. We've got a few different speakers today from all over the country, which is great. We've got Emily in Brighton and Hove, and we've got Mari in Moray. Super, it's working. People are hearing me. James is in Thanet, Emily is in Shrewsbury, Catherine's in Glasgow, Charlotte is in Sheffield, Kalyani is in Cambridge, Ben is in Clitheroe, Katie's in Brighton, Croydon, Bournemouth. Love it. Okay, super. So it sounds like everyone can hear me. Oh, I love this. Is so cool. I love webinars. Okay, well, thanks for joining us, guys, on this gray Tuesday morning. So this webinar is about maximizing family income. Here's the plan for. Ooh, my screen's a bit big. Okay, so the plan for today is first I'm going to talk to you a bit about Food Power's thematic push for 2018. Then we're going to hear from Moray's Fair Food Forum. Then we're going to hear about Brighton and Hove's work. Then I'm going to tell you a bit more about the financial support that's available to apply for. And then we'll have a Q&A. Just to let you know, the webinar will be recorded and it's available on our website like all of our other webinars afterwards. And you can see the slides and you can hear, you won't be able to see the chat. The other thing is to let you know that the chat box on the left is where everyone can see what you write. There's also a thing up at the top of your screen where you can ask a presenter a question. If you send a question that way, we can see it here, but not everyone else can see it. So if it's a private question, feel free to use that. But if it's a public question that it would probably benefit others to know the answer from, please, we recommend using the chat box because it's an easy way for all to us kind of interact together. Great. Okay, so on to, and let me know if the slides look funny to anyone also, but I think they should be okay. So kicking things off then. So as most of you are probably familiar with Food Power, we're running a 4-year program that is tackling the root causes of food poverty. And each year, or out of 3 of the years, we're going to be doing a thematic push on one topic that the Alliance members have identified as an important thing to look at. So this year in the autumn, when we had first opened up membership, we did a short survey to a number of the alliances. And what came up as one of the main themes that people were thought would be an important issue to focus on is this idea of maximizing family income and ways that alliances can take action to address this. So what we felt is that we asked the alliances a number of different questions around different precise things they could do, and this was kind of the umbrella term, the umbrella theme that we thought encapsulated a number of the actions that alliances could be taking. We also felt like this was something that that was coming up for a lot of alliances, but it hadn't yet been a huge focus of work. So it seemed like there was an opportunity to make impact. But there was also at least some stuff happening on these issues, and so there was also some momentum we could build on. So ideally, with each theme, what we're trying to do is identify a need within the alliance, figure out, is there a space that Food Power can have an impact and the work that we're going to be putting out can help, and make sure that it's not just coming out of left field, like it is something that people are working on and there's a way we can roll with it. So that's kind of where we came, that's kind of like the background of why we're talking about this issue. And it doesn't mean that it's the only thing we're going to be working on for the whole year. It just means that we're going to be running a variety of things having to do with it. So there's still the local evaluation work going on with the University of Cardiff. There's also the Empowering Experts by Experience work that Ben P. is running with doing pilot projects around the country. There's also the strategic development work as well as other things. The main things that we'll be looking at with the Food Power push in 2018 with the Maximizing Family Income is the financial support that's available. So that's up to $5K, and the applications are open now. I'll talk about that a bit more later. We'll be doing webinars on some of these topics. We have our conference coming up likely in June, and that will have a number of workshops on this topic. And then we'll also be coordinating peer learning sets, so kind of like little groups that are either geographically based or thematically based around the country, where people can share learning around this theme and actions around it in particular. So that'll happen a bit later in the year as the theme develops. Right now, we're very early days on it. We've got the financial support open, which has a brief which outlines it a bit more, and then things will kind of ramp up over the year with, in particular, more webinars, the conference, and then the peer learning sets. So what exactly are we talking about a bit more here? So a lot of words on here. I'm not going to read them all off, don't worry. But the main thing we're looking at this idea is how we can increase incomes and reduce costs so there's more money in people's pockets available to spend on food. So when we're talking about root causes of food poverty, what we're talking about is how people are able to buy the food that they want to. And so what we've done is we've kind of thinking of it as like an a la carte menu of actions that alliances could take around this. And this text is lifted directly from the funding guidelines brief that we've put out. So don't worry about this slide too much. You can read this in a nice PDF document that's on our website. I've got a link to it in a further slide. And so, one of the main ways that we thought alliances could take action on this, and that we'd seen other alliances doing, and kind of used as a outline for it, was having a focus on improving coordination and navigation of the local welfare safety net. So what we did is looking through what alliances have done and what alliances could do. We came up with this list of actions, which is the smaller bullet points you'll see on the slide. And this is different things that we think alliances could do as an alliance to help in their area to maximize family income. So you'll see some of them, they kind of link up, obviously. Some of it is around creating easy-to-use tools for navigation. So Brighton and Hove will be speaking about what they've done on that. Bringing together key actors to help streamline access to services and promote a joined-up approach. You'll hear about both groups, Moray and Brighton and Hove, talking about that later. Assessing how local services communicate with each other. And in that sense, not just advice services, but we're thinking of any sort of services that might be involved with or be interacting with or supporting people who are experiencing food poverty or at risk of experiencing food poverty. So that could include food banks, children food provision, or community food projects, advice services, local hardship funds, Healthy Start. So we're looking at both the statutory sector and the community work that's happening. Then potentially some sort of mapping exercise to identify gaps in service, understand pressure points, plan future work, piloting out these navigation tools, or developing a plan for future proofing, because as we all know, some things can get out of date quickly. So figuring out ways to do this so that there's longevity in what's created. And then also looking at access to local welfare assistance schemes in England, or government administered funds in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So what we thought with this is that it's likely that some alliances are already doing some of these things. Some might be doing none of these things. Some might be doing all of them, but that it's a way that you can, like I said, an a la carte menu, so you can kind of pick and choose, like, this makes sense. This is something that we've got the ability to do within our alliance. This is something that fits our organizational aims. So we try to keep a wide variety of things people can take action on in order to have more alliances be able to get involved in the theme each year, and to make sure that it kind of can match the different, because we've got such a diversity of alliances. Some are new, some have been around for many years, some are in rural areas, some are in urban areas. So we want to have a variety of things people can do so they can get involved in it. So along with this, there was a number of other things that kind of came up in our discussions and through the survey we did with alliances that related to this. So if we're talking about maximizing family income, it seemed like the local welfare safety net would be kind of the crux of the matter, but there were other things that came up as linked to or would be important with this. So we've tagged on these other 4 kind of sub-themes that we think might come up as key to when you're doing this work as well. So one of this is increasing knowledge of council tax support, and in particular, encouraging councils to set low minimum payments for people who qualify. Another one would be about ensuring children's access to food 365 days a year. And that would be including things as free school meal, holiday food, and breakfast clubs. Also looking at Healthy Start vouchers, because we're talking about income, and seeing how the uptake of Healthy Start vouchers and the reach of that in the local area could help families. And and then also supporting fair pay by promoting the living wage, both at the council level and to local employers. So we've put together in the funding guidelines much more information about all of this. I mean, we tried not to overload you. It's about a 5-page document. But in it, it's got more info about how we got to, a bit more about how we got to this as a theme. It's got a bit more information about measurement and how we're going to be looking to keep track of what alliances are doing on the theme and what kind of difference the program is making and the alliances are making in their local community. And then the thing that's probably most exciting, although exciting might be a stretch of a word, is a list of resources about each of these different the action points that alliances could take on. So we kind of looked around for both case studies and evidence of need and further information about the issues. So there's a bit for alliances to see, like, why would this be important, evidence of need, and also for things like funding or to demonstrate why it's an important action to take to other people within an alliance, for example, or to local councils. Case studies, you can see what's been done, what's been learned, and how it could apply to your own area, and then just general further information, particularly around things like the council tax and some of the kind of grittier things. So you'll see on the slide there's a download, there's a link to download the application guidelines, and that's helpful for if you're interested in applying for the funding, which is up to 5K. But it's also also hopefully quite helpful if you're not interested in applying for the funding and looking to take action on this more widely as a part of the food power push. So that is the main crux of the theme for us right now that I'm going to get into. We now want to make sure that we're using the webinars to hear from alliances around the UK. So I'm going to pass it over to Mari to talk a bit more about what's going on in her area.
Hi, I'm Mari McCallum. I'm the project manager at Murray Food Bank. I have to say I'm quite nervous. I've never done this before, and it's really strange speaking to people that I can't see. But I kind of realised I can delude myself and crack a joke, pretend you're all laughing. So that's what I'm going with. So what I thought I would do is just give a brief overview about Murray, a bit about the food bank, because we've had quite a transition over the last couple of years, a bit about the projects we're doing, the development of our alliance, and just really the work that we're doing after that. So I sort of thought most people won't really know where Murray is, to be honest. I didn't know much about Murray until I moved here. I come from just outside Glasgow. So it's right in the northeast of Scotland. It's quite a small region. The main town is Elgin, which is about an hour's drive away from Inverness and about 2 hours from Aberdeen, which are the main cities in the north of Scotland. The population of Murray is around about 90,000, so it's not very big. But 25% of the people live in Elgin, which is the administrative centre, and the rest sort of live on the main towns that are shown on the map there. Lossiemouth, most people have heard of because the RAF are based there, and Kinloss used to have an RAF base, it's now Army Barracks, so that's kind of the main thing. The other thing we're most famous for is whisky, so if you like your whisky, you'll recognise some of the names on the map there. When we talk about Murray, we usually talk about its beauty. It's got the Murray Firth, so we've got lovely beaches, we've got whales and dolphins, we've got pagan rituals like the Clavey, we've got golf and sport, the Northern Lights, whisky. It all just sounds fantastic. But the reality is, with a lot of rural areas, it's a very low wage area. Most people work part-time, including myself. I've got 2 part-time jobs. There's a lot of seasonal employment. We get a lot of people coming from Europe to come in and do the seasonal work in the fields. There's still agriculture here. There's still a bit of fishing. We've got some fish farms. The main sectors really are around food and drink. Whisky is massive. It brings so much money into the economy. We've got some of the big food producers like Baxter's and Walker's, which I'm sure everybody's heard of. The main employers in the area are the NHS and the local authority and the RAF. So it's a very reliant economy. It's quite fragile. The RAF were talking about pulling out about 5 years ago, and it would have had a massive impact. So that sort of pushed the council to look at trying to diversify the economy, but it hasn't happened too much yet. The council itself, it's one of the lowest paying authorities in Scotland, and that really is across the board. It's a very low income area. There's not many management level jobs, so most opportunities are outside. The highest earners tend to be working in Aberdeen in the oil industry. They maybe live in Murray, but they travel. Again, with most rural areas, the issues that are faced, there's poor employment opportunities. There's a general attitude that actually Murray's an affluent area, that there's no poverty here at all, and that's something that we really have to fight against. We don't, in Scotland, we use the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. We don't really register on that. There's a much smaller dispersed population. There's pockets of deprivation rather than large areas like you have in the cities. And unfortunately, a lot of the funders and a lot of the resources are dictated by the SIMD. Fuel poverty is a huge issue. There's a lot of traditional houses that are really old and they're cold and damp. We've also got a huge reliance on cars. Public transport's not great. Cost of fuel's higher. And working in the food bank, we're very aware that a lot of people are having to choose between whether they can buy food or whether they can put fuel in their car to get to work. So there's a lot of difficult choices. We're very reliant on the public sector like the NHS and the local authority, and it's really vulnerable to cuts, and that has such a knock-on effect for people. With it being rural, again, with most rural areas, there's a lot of isolation. That could be for young people as well as older people. The cuts to the services are affecting the most vulnerable. Just last week they announced they were going to cut the Meals on Wheels service. So there's a lot of people there that are very vulnerable, and they are living in poverty, but it's so hidden. With the food poverty, there's been a real increase in the demand for the food bank use. We've pretty much, by the end of December this year, we had done more sort of referrals than we had in the whole of last year. So we're seeing quite a substantial increase. And that's actually from non-traditional users. We're getting a lot of people that are working and they're just really struggling on the low income to make ends meet. The other thing that's a wee bit unique about Murray is our political climate makes it quite hard for us to operate in. Our local authority has an administration that's a Conservative Independent alliance. It's got a very, very small majority. Sometimes they can actually be a minority. It depends if somebody's had a straw up and left. And the main opposition's the SNP. So a lot of the time it's just sort of points scoring against each other, and it's quite hard to be productive and push ahead and get things done. And also in the last election, we lost our SNP MP, and we now have a Conservative MP, and we've got an MSP. So again, they don't work well together. So we really do struggle to kind of push ahead with anything that we want to develop. On top of all of that, the Murray Council has actually declared that it potentially faces bankruptcy in the next 2 years. So we know there's going to be massive cuts coming. Again, it's going to affect the most vulnerable. It's going to push more people into poverty, and really the third sector is going to have to try and sort of fill the gap there. So basically, as I say, I come from Murray Food Bank. We initially set up around about 2011. We were Community Food Murray, and our focus was on nutrition. And it was about sort of developing nutritional workshops and looking at food provision. But over the years, the food bank work really sort of took over. We had quite a traumatic period where our manager left, a lot of our board members left, and it gave us an opportunity to actually take stock and look at what we were doing as an organisation. We realised that we'd had a huge amount of mission drift. We were chasing money. We were just sort of looking at pots of money and seeing what we could deliver to get that funding. So it gives a chance to really sort of look at what we were doing, focus on the food bank work. And as a board, they really decided that actually concentrating on poverty, food poverty, and supporting families really was going to be our new focus. So as part of that, we've developed quite a few projects. The emergency food provision is always the core of what we do. As I say, our referrals are increasing. We started doing Holybub Club, which is holiday clubs. So that's looking at the issue of holiday hunger. And we're really lucky, we've got a local funder that's very supportive of that. So we deliver 2 clubs, and we know that we're sort of meeting our target of supporting families that are most in need. We only have 4 part-time members of staff, so we really rely on our volunteers to deliver our services. And we got funding from Voluntary Action Fund to really develop our volunteering programme. But we now have about 40 volunteers that volunteer with us on a weekly basis. And they come from all backgrounds. We have people that have been food bank users, people that have got mental health issues, people that have experienced homelessness. So Murray is an area where there's a lack of opportunity, and as an organisation we try and provide that where we can. We've recently done a scoping exercise around cooking and growing, and that's a project that we want to develop. We sort of understand that one way of addressing food poverty is by giving people skills. So we're just in a position of sort of trying to source funding for that. Yesterday we delivered our first Nourish workshop. That's sort of going in and working with primary school pupils. We've got a small group of 5, and the school have particularly picked them because they know that they're not getting the opportunity to do anything at home. The very first session was based around something as simple as making sandwiches. They're going to a residential week and they don't actually know how to make sandwiches, and they're going to have to do that when they're away. So it's very, very basic skills that we're teaching them. The Food Hub is our biggest project, and that's really us. We've got a real desire to try and move away from the emergency food provision. So through our Food Hub project, we created community larders, and we targeted particular areas where we knew we were getting a lot of referrals. So we started off going into the homeless supported accommodation, and we put a store of food in there that we call a community larder. And that just means that people can access that as and when they want. They don't need to put a referral into the food bank. And we're actually finding that people get less reliance on it. They feel that there's an element of security because the food's there. They're taking less than they would normally take if they were to get a food parcel. And it's actually stopped people from shoplifting and skip diving. So we're really pleased with that. We also do a lot of food recovery. We get the recovered food from our local supermarkets, and we give that out to a lot of community groups. We're supporting quite a lot of breakfast clubs in the schools and some of the lunch clubs in the area. So that's just helping take food that would go to waste and supporting people that are in need of it, just trying to stop them falling into the food insecurity. So through our Food Hub project, we sort of decided that we knew that food poverty was becoming such an issue. Our referrals were increasing. We were getting such a demand on the work that we're doing through the Food Hub that we wanted to try and address it at a much more strategic level. So we sort of looked at developing a sort of food forum, and we started going around and speaking to people. And we realised that there was a real sort of desire. There was work that was starting to happen in the area, but it wasn't just around food poverty, it was about other forms of poverty. So just through discussion, we had our first meeting last June, and that's where we sort of formed our alliance, and we call it our Fairer Murray Forum. It's quite unique, I think, because we've managed to get quite a good mix of people involved. We've got third sector organisations, we've got people right at the top of the Murray Council, so we've got the corporate director for education and social care, so he's responsible for all the schools and all the social work. We've got somebody that's really heavily involved in the benefits management in the council. We've also got the interim director of public health for the NHS Grampian, plus we've got our local MSP, and we've got housing representatives, so we've got a really, really good mix of the sort of movers and shakers in Murray. We wanted to have folk that could actually make decisions rather than people that are working at ground level. The people that are working at ground level are doing a brilliant job. Actually, we needed to target a wee bit higher up. So what we discovered was actually there were some people that were tasked with doing wee bits about poverty. There was somebody in the council that was starting to look at developing a strategy, and we just thought if we bring all our resources together and have much more joined up work, it would be a lot more effective. So really the main focus when we first met, and I'm not saying this because Emily's here, was actually the Brighton and Hove food poverty work that they had been doing. Everybody had just been so impressed by that and actually very inspired, and that's what our main focus sort of became. So we decided we wanted to do a snapshot of poverty in Murray, and also that we would have a poverty conference, and that would really raise awareness of poverty in Murray, to try and address the people that say it's an affluent area, that there is no poverty. So we have our conference in a couple of weeks' time. Simon is coming to speak at it, which we're pleased about. And we've got a lot of other really high-profile speakers. So sort of through the snapshot report and the conference, we're really hoping that folk will start to sit up and realise that we're not the affluent area that people think that we are, and that there are people that are struggling, that are experiencing poverty, and that there is really inequality. So our two main outcomes are really going to be met. The report is going to be launched at the conference, and obviously the conference will be delivered. So we've started to look at what other work that we would want to do. One of the main things, we applied for the Food Power funding, and we're really pleased to get it. So we'll start our work in April to develop a food poverty action plan. And really the outcomes for that will be to look at what the main causes of food poverty are, how we can tackle them, who we can bring together to do that. We had put in facilitate income maximisation. Obviously, the new programme through Food Power addresses that as well. Look at the school meals and holiday hunger, and also just inform the Alliance. Members of our Alliance are involved in other strategic groups. We want that information to get out there and go further ahead. So longer term, what we would like to do is develop into a sort of poverty commission for Moray. And that's sort of our longer term goal. And we're also looking at what other pieces of work that we could do and what we could lead on. So really, our future ambitions, we've got sort of two. One's as an organisation. Ideally, we would love to reduce the food bank usage, but that doesn't seem realistic at the moment. It just seems to be an increase in users, even though we're trying to do more early intervention work. We really want to expand our food hub work, which is our early intervention work, and try and get out and support more people and more community groups. And we also want to try and develop our cooking and growing project. As an alliance, we want to sort of successfully complete the food poverty plan and actually have that in place, have organisations delivering on it and make a difference to people. We would like to widen it out and actually develop a poverty plan that brings in all aspects, not just food poverty. And then, sorry, I've put Food Power Plus, but it should be Food Power Push. We would like to develop the income maximisation work a wee bit more, and we're looking at the new fund to see. We've got our eye on a tool that we might quite like to develop, so we're just in the process of doing all the background for an application. And as I said before, we would like to develop into a poverty commission for Moray. So really, the lessons that we've learned through the work that we're doing is to have a focus, and that's not just as an organisation but also as an alliance. As an organisation, we've sort of agreed that our focus is to address food poverty and to support families, and that's made a massive difference to how we operate. Every project we develop has to fit into that remit, and it stopped us having this mission drift that we had before. And as an alliance, because of the people that we have involved in our alliance, everybody's got their own sort of agenda, their own emphasis, and sometimes it can be a wee bit like herding cats. So we found that actually if we've got a focused piece of work for us to concentrate on, so whether it's a report, whether it's the action plan, or whether it was a conference, it's more productive for us to work in that way. We've learned very much to be ambitious, that not to be scared to we're a small organisation, but we've got big ideas, but we sort of have to be realistic as well about what we can achieve. The positive funding aspect is really not to chase funding, but to find what fits best with what you want to do, and also to build up good relationships with the funders that you have. Be brave. I'm really lucky. I've got a chair that's got a bit of a brass neck on her, and she's just gone round and she's knocked on doors and she's chanced her luck, and she's been really pleased that folk have wanted to engage, and that's sort of why we've managed to get an alliance of really sort of high strategic people, the main people in Moray. We had absolutely no idea that we would be so successful in doing that. Be proud and confident. We are a small organisation, and sometimes we feel a bit overshadowed by the people that we do have in our alliance, but actually what we achieve is just as important as what they achieve, and we really are sort of equal members and partners. As I say, keep your alliance focused. We have made a decision that as an alliance we would keep it quite a small group and just bring in other people as and when required, or create working groups. So for some of the work that we're going to do in our food poverty plan, we'll set up a couple of working groups rather than expand the alliance. And that just means that we can be more focused in what we do. And also networking. The advantage to the alliance is that we might not know somebody that can help, but actually if you look at your network and see who knows someone else, and for our poverty conference that's been really beneficial as well to bring a lot of people in. So the problems we've faced, really, it's everybody will know about funding. It's always difficult to do stuff. We find it hard to access core funding to cover our management, and also because of where we are, again, we don't register on the SIMD, which a lot of funders look at. It's difficult for us to bring money in. It's difficult to find funding to do strategic work. Most of the funders we've spoken to really just want to fund projects that are doing the ground level work. Capacity, as I said, there's 4 part-time members of staff, I only work 15 hours a week, and it's just trying to manage everything and expand. And it starts to become restrictive in what you want to achieve. So again, it's about being realistic about what you can do, but trying to be ambitious at the same time. As an organisation, we're really looking to try and increase the hours of all our staff, and we have to be brave and make the risk at some point that actually if we increase that person's hours, then they'll be able to achieve more and we can deliver more and hopefully bring more funding in through that. One of the biggest problems we had was loss of control. We are really the drivers behind our alliance, and when you go to a meeting, as you know, everybody does have their own agenda, and sometimes things start to move away from where you feel they should be. But it's just having to accept that it is a partnership, and not everybody's going to feel the same way. Everybody's voice should be equal, and you just sort of have to go with the flow sometimes. But again, if you can actually sort of play to people's strengths rather than sort of their weaknesses, then generally you can get the most out of everybody that's sitting around the table. And one of the other biggest problems for us is really the bureaucratic obstacles. We've started having discussions around becoming a poverty commission. And some of the feedback we've had from our local authority as well, there's no need for that. So again, it's finding a way of working in partnership with people, but sometimes it's working around them. And the most important thing for our alliance is really just to remain independent. We don't want to become part of the council, we don't want to become part of the community planning, but we do want to work with them. So it's about just recognising the role that we have within our area. So I hope that's okay. That's me finished. So thank you.
Thanks so much. So we're going to just bring up the slides for Emily's presentation from Brighton and Hove. Oops, just got to go back to the beginning. Okay, Emily, it is over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks. It's lovely to hear from Murray there. There's amazing work going on up there. I'm just going to talk to you today about a particular bit of work that we did back in 2013, so quite a while ago really, about joining up the links between food banks, advice services and welfare benefits, or when I say joining up, trying to make sure that they were as joined up as possible, and also to make it a bit easier to navigate between them. So I'm going to do hopefully 10 minutes on that. And I am just going to have a quick whiz through, if there's time and we're not running too late, through some of the work we've done since then that seems relevant to this particular funding stream and approach. So just to say, I'm going to do a bit of a whiz through because there's quite a lot to cover. But if you've got questions about it, then there is time for questions afterwards. So if you just pop them in the chat box, and Simon's beavering away, kind of getting people's questions, and the same with Murray's presentation as well. So we can come back if there's anything in particular that we need to talk about. The other thing to say is I'm sitting here in my living room and I've got 2 dogs. So obviously if you hear barking, that's not me. But equally, if there's any kind of weird groaning noises, that'll be one of the dogs. That's not me, I hope. So I'm just to let you know the context. So basically, I was asked to talk about this exercise we did, as I said a little while ago, about joining links up. I suppose there's 2 things to say about doing this. It's a kind of map. It's an infographic map. And it was part of it was we were trying to look at new ways of sharing information and turning what's often really complicated information around food. Food always seems to be complicated into to make it easier to explain to people what's going on. So this for us was an experiment in working with a designer to produce an infographic. I did not do this picture, I just want to stress, and nor would I be able to. I gave the designer a load of post-it notes. But so just to say, we think that was really successful for us. I'll talk a bit about learning at the end, but it did turn something really complicated about food banks and what to do and what else to think about into a map. And we still use it on our website and in other areas. So that was one thing, but obviously you do need to then be aware if you're thinking of doing something like this, that it was working with a designer. So you need to allow the cost of working with a designer that added to the cost of doing the exercise. The other thing to say is it's about a mapping exercise. So so that's it, like any mapping exercise, the map you get at the end is part of the process. So I'm going to sort of step back and say how we got into the process of being ready to do the map before we did the map. So this work came out of the Brighton and Hove food strategy, which we refreshed in 2011. It's a really important context of, we're quite a small city. We're about 250,000 people. I think when people come to Brighton and Hove, most people have got an image of this kind of quite fancy pants place with lots of lovely restaurants and healthy looking people. But we are two cities, really. We're a very expensive place to live in. The downside of all this fancy pants side is actually for normal people, it's ever so expensive. Housing is in severe demand, and in a sense, we are two different cities. We have some of the most deprived wards in the south or in the country. And our food strategy sort of reflects that. And the main thing to say as well is obviously the whole food strategy approach and the whole food partnership approach is its partners. We do some service deliveries. We do have projects running that we do ourselves, but we're also a partnership. So that's just a really important thing to say, that a lot of the stuff in our food strategy isn't us. It's about us perhaps acting as a bit of catalyst, bringing people together, but it's other people actually doing the doing. So in our food strategy, we wanted to, one of the actions in there was to understand a bit better about the food poverty picture. At that time, food banks were just becoming a bit of a thing. So we started with looking at the situation around food banks in the city. There'd been quite a sudden increase in food bank provision, which has carried on since then. And also, I suppose the thing to say about our city is, I think if you have you can have a city with a number of food banks which are all run by the Trussell Trust. They tend to be the kind of main franchise, and then obviously there's quite a common approach and some communication between them. But most of ours has sprung up from independent providers, existing community groups. They're faith-based run. Even we had 3 children's centres. It started with 1, and then it turned into 3 children's centres who added on food banks to their provision. So we have very different types of organisations. So one of the things we did was we put food banks in a room together, along with advisors and some of the people involved in welfare benefits in the city, which was initially meant to be a one-off meeting. And then that turned into a bit of a network. And it was important for us, I suppose, to say that underlying the ethos of how we approached it was that it was very important that it wasn't just food banks in a room together, which was also really important, but also other people. So, for instance, Fair Share are a regular attender because they deliver food to a lot of the food banks in the city, and it's a chance for them to speak to them together. But also benefits and advice services. We have a lot of voluntary, we being an awkward city, as well as having lots of separate independent food banks, we've got lots of separate independent voluntary sector advice services, as well as the kind of council welfare and advice services. And it seemed really important that they were all together. And so this mapping exercise really came out of that existing approach to partnership, and it came out of the network in a sense. And there are a couple of reasons why the mapping bit seemed really important. One was this idea that a bag of food doesn't solve the underlying problem as to why someone is there, as it's been put to us. It's really important that food banks and advice services are joined up. And I should say that food banks themselves tell us that it is very much a user-led network. It's not something where we're telling everybody what they should be doing. But I suppose there is always a bit of a balance, isn't there, when you run a network? If I'm honest, I suppose we did bring a bit of leadership around that as well. We did think those were the people that needed to be in the room in the first place, and invited them to the first meeting, which then everybody felt was a good approach, so carried on. And that's been part of the way things have gone, of work going forward. And in fact, we do often get things like commissioners coming along to the Food Banks Network meeting. We had that recently with Universal Credit, for instance. We had a speaker from a nearby city who'd been a rollout for Universal Credit, talking about the impact there. And we had commissioners come along so they could not only hear about, how Universal Credit had affected our neighbouring town, but also it was a chance for them to hear food banks' concerns direct from the horse's mouth, as it were. So it's always been about joining up, and it's always user-led. The other reason for having, sorry, I think I've just done 2 slides there. The other reason for having a map is that actually people in advice services were getting really confused about how to refer into a food bank, how to do it. And we know that because at the time we were piloting, and we ended up running quite a few food poverty awareness sessions with frontline workers and benefit workers. And they just were really confused because it was such this quite complicated picture. And at the time, food banks weren't so much of a thing and didn't really know what they were. So it was also answering a need that advice services had identified to us. So we could have just done a map. And in fact, this slide here shows a directory and a searchable map that's just been added to our new website, and which does have a map, which does now have a map on it. But at the time, food banks didn't want an actual map because they were worried that people would just turn up. It was, I suppose, food banks weren't as well known. The whole thing around referrals wasn't as clear. And I think perhaps we had some concerns as well about the impact. If we suddenly put them all on a map, would they suddenly get inundated with people? Would they be able to cope with the demand? Would having a kind of a whole load of a map of free food effectively mean that people then wanted free food? Would that generate demand that wasn't there before? But anyway, we've got past that. We now have this map, but at the time they didn't want that. So we made a kind of how and why map, which hopefully answered some of the needs we talked about. I'm not going to talk in great detail about what's in it, but just to mention that it was very important for us that it included some of the kind of more holistic community and longer term options, things like lunch clubs, which are kind of on the right, the community bit. You can look at this map on our website after if you're interested in the detail. I think the other thing I wanted to mention was that the process of getting everybody in a room and thinking about how a map would work was in a sense a bit of working out the triage. One of the groups that we'd identified, and we know this because we get the odd call, we're not a frontline service, we don't intend to get calls, but we get people ringing up, as do advisors, who are basically are really desperate, and we've called them the sort of too hungry to think category, who can't even wait for food bank referrals. So we agreed a kind of process for where they should go. Brighton Unemployed Centres Families Project agreed that they would be the point of referral for those, and that actually ideally we wanted advisors and people like ourselves to not send people to them unless they're in dire emergency, so as to protect their capacity for the really desperate and in need people. I have to say, it all sounds very neat when I put it like this and we look at it on a map. It doesn't always work quite as well, obviously, but that's the idea. At least there is a principle, even if it doesn't always work 100%. The other thing to say is that we put advice right at the heart of the map. It's in that section in the middle. People need to go to advice, both to get help with their underlying problems, and also for the referral. We felt it was important people weren't just bowling up at food banks, that they understood the referral processes that most of them have. Just to say as well, I think this map has also secretly, don't tell them in the cities, also really been a bit of a campaigning tool. There was a big pink box in the middle, just below the advice services, for the local discretionary social fund, which is what we call that fund in our city. They're called different things in different places. Some people don't have them at all now, but it's basically the thing that came in as a replacement for the old crisis loans. And you can very clearly see when you look at the map as a whole that bit is the statutory bit. Everything else really is the voluntary sector picking up the pieces. So for us, having a big pink box in the middle was also a way of flagging up the importance of having some statutory provision. So it wasn't just down to voluntary groups to deal with this issue. And then in terms of, as a mapping exercise, in terms of the learning that we had, as I said, it was a collective exercise. We were in a room. We didn't have that long. The meetings are only, a couple of hours anyway, and we didn't want the whole meeting. Well, we probably spent about a couple of hours on it, with lots of post-it notes. And it was important that the process was really important. It was working out who should go where and why. And I think the other thing just to say about it is I think it does help to make it clearer that I think the process of developing the map was also another stage in deepening the links between advice services in the city and welfare services and food banks, that by collectively creating a map together, we did help to embody in each other. And we have been very good in the city. I have to say, food banks have always been brilliant about bringing advisors into food banks and making sure they've got really good referrals both ways, but also in valuing the links between those. So I do think that mapping process was quite an important part of that. It's also obviously it's quite useful. It's a nice thing. It's on our website. It's been useful as a training tool. I mentioned I did some food poverty awareness training. I use it as a kind of, when I was running those still, I used to use it as a little, a handout really, and then we go through parts of it and it was a very visual way to explain some quite complicated issues. I think, in terms of what isn't so great about it is you do need a bit of extra information with it. It's fine if you're using it as a training tool, but on our website, we do have to make sure that we have the extra information, what we mean by the too hungry to think box, and people should think about the local discretionary social fund rather than a food bank if somebody's eligible, because it's more important that they go there and takes the pressure off the food banks, those kinds of things. So that's how it worked. I was just going to take a few minutes as well. I've only got 3 minutes left. I'm keeping a very close eye on my time. So I just wanted to say that the work that came out of this focus on emergency food and mapping and joining, we also then shifted focus quite a lot to thinking more about long-term food poverty or household food insecurity. So in our iceberg analogy, that's the people in crisis food poverty, all the stuff around food banks is the bit at the tip of the iceberg. But actually, the way to prevent people getting to that tip is around dealing with the longer term issues. All sorts of things from living wage, a lot of the stuff that's involved in this fund, really. So we did then look at pulling together people. This is a roundtable event where we brought in very high level decision makers. So we had the director of public health sitting next to the director of adult social care, with the manager of the main food bank in the city, those kinds of things. But we did lots of other consultation in order to pull together a citywide food poverty action plan, which we're just looking at doing a final report on now. It has been really good at galvanising activity, and just because of, I suppose the other thing to say about that, again, it's a partnership plan, and it has been we found it a really good way of making sure conversations happen and of galvanising action. And I was just going to whiz through really quickly, and again, do ask questions if there's anything that you need to know a bit more about. But I just thought it'd be useful just to touch, there's a lot of actions in there, and there's 78 actions. But the ones that are particularly relevant to this fund and about joining up welfare services and boosting family income, one thing that it did was identify the people who are most vulnerable to food poverty in the city. So there's a list, you don't need to read it, but there's a list on the right. And one of those on that list was families, especially large families and single parent families. And they were identified as particularly at risk, so as to kind of encourage people, if we have limited resources, as we all do at the moment, to be able to focus those effectively. There was also some further actions around continuing to integrate food poverty and money advice. So not just about referrals in and out from advisors, but also how food can actually be a tool in budgeting sessions and in things like, we have, quite a big move towards digital inclusion and getting online. And we've got one of the partners in the food poverty action plan has been Digital Brighton, and they have agreed, through their partnership, to try and encourage providers to always include a food buying session as part of that kind of getting online session training, so that when people go home, they feel more confident about ordering food, which can be a real godsend, especially if someone's short, low on mobility or finds it difficult to get out or short of money. I'm going to just whiz through these because I'm running out of time, but just to say that there were some specific actions in that. We worked with the DWP and with council benefit things. So there were, obviously you can read the plan online if you're interested, but there's things like the DWP agreed to be much better about telling people about short-term benefit advances when somebody gets a sanction, and they ran some awareness sessions with jointly for advice and food bank workers. So there were some really specific things about welfare. There's also stuff about looking strategically ahead to who's going to be most affected by future rounds of welfare reform, which of course is very current now because of universal credit, and identifying who's going to be most effective. There was an aim within the plan. There was 5 overall aims, which all the actions were grouped under. There was one which was about every child can eat 1 nutritious meal a day. And I think people really got that. It was also about vulnerable adults as well, not just children, but obviously with the family's focus, I'm looking at children. That's a pretty modest aim, but actually is hugely important. And that covered all the stuff, everything from breastfeeding to healthy cooking advice, healthy start vouchers and vitamins. And this did actually lead during the lifetime of the plan to quite a big Healthy Start partnership campaign in the city, which you can look at. There's a report on our website, and stuff around things like breakfast clubs, free school meal uptake, holiday hunger, all those kind of aims. And the other thing was obviously it built on the stuff around the food banks network and the way that we looked at joining up advice with that, making sure digital access, cookery, that kind of thing could be accessible through food banks in the city. And obviously there was an action in there about continuing the food banks and emergency food network, which is something we have now. We're in the middle of sort of 4-year funding for to keep going, and we've been able to strengthen. So just to say, yeah, there's lots of resources on our website. There's this particular map, there's a little case study on that bit of earlier work. And then there's a more recent case study about putting together the Food Poverty Action Plan. There's also a page about the Food Poverty Action Plan, which looks in it in a bit more detail. And I think I'm going to whiz towards the end there. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. We're just going to go back to the other slideshow. Thank you, Emily and Mari. Those are both incredibly interesting presentations and really useful to hear, and definitely brought up a number of questions which Simon has been keeping track of for us. So just real quickly back for me before we go to the Q&A, and just to note that if you can write your questions in the left-hand side column in the attendee chat, everyone can see them, or you can send them to us privately and we'll read them out. But on the left-hand side, then the presenters can see them also. So we've now got applications are now being accepted for up to £5,000 on the Maximising Family Income theme. The full guidelines are online with this kind of a la carte menu of actions that you can look into. Those are due on 5 p.m. the 21st of February. And we're also very happy to chat through any ideas in advance of submission. As Emily and Mari mentioned, we've had 16 alliances have been awarded funding already for strategic development of their work. And we also, and that was for a different pot of funding we had open in 2017, but we also have the funding available for engaging experts by experience, and the deadline is on Friday for that one. The information for that is on the same page. If you click on the link that's on the current slide, the info for that is on there. So we're now going to go into Q&A, which Simon has been keeping track of for us. So I'll pass it over to him, and Emily and Mari can just jump in to answer things as we go through.
Morning, everyone. Simon here. Mari, just some practical questions for you before a couple of other ones. Are there any places left for the conference in February? Have you done? Hang on, there are just 3, you know. Have you done a scoping for the Food Poverty Action Plan at all? Any sort of scoping document? And could you just clarify what the report is that you'll be launching at the conference?
The conference is fully booked. Actually, it was full in about 10 days of advertising, which is fantastic. And we've got a waiting list of about 20 people. So it'd be a bit unlikely for somebody to be able to sign up now, unfortunately. We did a scoping exercise based around cooking and growing workshops. And as part of that, we did speak to people about food poverty. So that gave us a wee bit of an overview that we took some of that information when we were doing our food power application around our poverty action plan. But again, a lot of the inspiration actually came from Emily's work around that. The report we were talking about, we're doing a snapshot of poverty in Murray. So it's just really doing a very brief overview of the main issues, so that the people that say there is no poverty in Murray, we can say, well, actually there is, and that's what we're going to launch at the Poverty Conference. So I hope that answers those questions.
Thanks, Mary. Then 2 more for you. Could you just quickly say any sort of tips, I guess, you have for managing the particular geography you have in your area that might apply to other areas with sort of comparable dispersed communities that you've talked about? And is there any other learning or top tips you'd give around engaging community leaders and promoting that leadership. That one of the questions we had through the private message was saying, obviously, leadership can be really important.
I think it's quite dispersed, but most of the organisations and the largest part of the population are in sort of Elgin and the main towns, so that's not too bad. But when we're looking at doing our consultation, and we have done consultation in the past, we'll make a point of going out to the small village halls and working with the smaller groups. So, but we've always, there's some organisations that are very Elgin centric, but we've always had the view that we are a Murray service, and Tolmontil's probably our furthest away town. It's about an hour's drive from Elgin, and we've taken food bank referrals down there. So, you know, we do travel to all sort of points of the county, and it's just really bearing that in mind when you do any work, that whatever you do has to be accessible, and just to actually get out and speak to people in the community. I can't remember what your other question was. It was about tips.
The second one was about sort of engaging local leaders, community leaders to develop leadership. So I guess it's not all on you to be that.
I think, like I said at the beginning, I say brass neck, but it's about sort of just going and asking people. So we just thought, who would we like to sit in our forum, our alliance, and we just went and asked them. And we're not shy of asking people. And it's about like delegating, not always taking everything on yourself, and just asking somebody. Most folk are quite happy to do it, but not to be shy of the fact that you maybe think you're not a equal partner, that you're maybe below them because they're working at this really high strategic level. And not, as an organisation, we do take a lot on ourselves, and we have to push ourselves to actually start to delegate and give a wee bit of the control away. So it's a kind of two-way thing, really. But just to ask people, you'd be surprised how many folk do actually want to help. And with us, we are starting in the last year. We've probably built our reputation up as an organisation. Our work speaks for itself. So it's about being very confident about what you do and trying to do the best that you can, and just don't be afraid to ask people to help you.
Thanks, Mary. And am I right that the report from that you're launching at the conference will be public?
Yeah, we've started to develop a Facebook page for our alliance, and the report will be available on that. There'll probably be two versions of the report. That the person that's doing it for us is a retired academic, so it's a bit like a thesis for him. So the report's going to be really, really big, and then we'll have a summarised version that we'll hand out in the day. So both will be available through our Facebook page. The conference is on the 16th of February, so our Facebook page, the information will be on that a wee bit after.
And we can include that in the Food Power newsletter at the beginning of March as well.
Yeah, okay.
If you want.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I'll give you the information.
Then Emily, a few questions about your map. Just how long did it take you to create the map? Sort of what sort of timeline do you think people should be thinking about? And how long do you think it will stay up to date, and how do you keep it up to date?
Yeah, in terms of actually creating the map, we did it within a network meeting. So there was a bit of prep thinking about how we could possibly do the exercise, which did involve a lot of Post-it notes. And then I think we actually spent about 2 hours doing the mapping exercise itself, and ended up with a big flip chart full of lots of arrows and bits of paper. And that was then given to the designer, who came up with a kind of tube map infographic format. So that was actually, I think it was one of those things where it was actually quite quick, I suppose, but the before and the after were quite long. There was a bit of toing and froing afterwards. And I suppose the real thing to say is actually the network was at a point then where it was quite functioning and quite, we'd already had a couple of meetings. People were really up for joint working. I think the groundwork was the kind of first couple of meetings where we put people in a room, people had got to know each other, people had shared practical tips. Like, you know, there was a lot of stuff about, you know, sourcing food, sharing surplus food. If you've got too much in one of the food banks, they could give it to another one. So I think I suppose that's partly why I sort of set the contacts going back a bit, is actually it was because the network was already happening that the mapping exercise could take place relatively painlessly. And we did another mapping exercise afterwards, and that was really good as well, where we worked out catchments for the different food banks, because they were a bit concerned some areas might have no provision and some areas might have overlapping provision. So it's been a really nice tool for joint working generally, I think, doing mapping. And that was literally just with a big map. And then the other question was about it going out of date. Actually, the point of doing it as an infographic is it hasn't really gone out of date. I think we did that in 2013, and we have made one small change to it since then, where we had to go back to the designer. I should say that's the downside of working with a designer. It means, if it was a Word document or something on a PowerPoint slide, we could change it ourselves. But we do have to go back to the designer. I mean, it doesn't really cost anything much at all, because it was just a tiny thing, which was, I mentioned we'd put on about Brighton Unemployed Centres Families Project being the first point of call for really desperate people who couldn't even wait for a referral. And there were opening hours changed, so we had to change that on there. But and the reason we put that on is because it was for desperate people that people felt was really important. We did put those hours on there, but for all the other food banks, we didn't put contact details on the infographic. It is very much a sort of how and why tool. So they were always put separately on. Initially, it was on a confidential sheet that just went to advisors because they didn't want their details public. And now it's, as I said, we've got a directory on the website. So that is updated regularly. We do an annual survey of the food banks in the city, and that's an opportunity to update contact details. And often we're aware if something has changed in the meantime, if it, in between that annual exercise. So that does need updating. Obviously, it's a kind of list and then a more like a directory. But the infographic itself and the principles behind it haven't changed. I suppose the big change will come if the local discretionary social fund does disappear. It's forever under threat, as it is in other areas. There is very little statutory help for people in need. So if the big pink box does disappear, then there will need to be, the infographic will then be out of date, would need redesigning. But otherwise, it's had quite a good life, actually. We've literally just done one little change on it, and I think the designer just did that for us because he was doing another bit of work at the time for us anyway.
Thanks, Emily. That's really helpful. Just two quick clarifications and then we'll have to wrap it up. When you talk about working with the DWP locally, do you mean local job centres? And also, are you able to share your food poverty awareness training module in any way with others?
Yeah, the DWP, it was Job Centre Plus. We have two Job Centre Pluses in the city, and we worked in different ways with them. The main way was through, they had a partnership manager at the time who was quite helpful, and he seemed to be the only person. They are really difficult to engage with. I'm sure everyone who's tried to's found that, but he was quite up for things like coming along to certain meetings, and was willing to make some offers as part of the much wider process as well of the developing the food poverty action plan, which I didn't talk about, but as Marie was saying, involved lots of consultation and getting people together, and he was willing to take part in that and made some offers around that. So yeah, that was how he mainly engaged. I have done some more practical stuff, I suppose, slightly outside of that, but where we've done some food poverty awareness training with DWP workers, because although there was some kind of technical thing where they weren't supposed to be referring to food banks, because at the time the government didn't want it to become a kind of institutionalised part of the welfare system, but actually they were all referring to food banks. So we did do a kind of session about how to do it right and what else to think about. And in terms of that training that we did, I have different PowerPoints that I've done. We did a kind of 2.5 hour session that was a funded session that we did for people like housing workers that the council paid for us to do. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to share that with people if that's useful. I've also got like a 30-minute session, because most contexts you're talking to people about those sort of things like the DWP or advice workers. They don't really want a 2.5 hour session. They want a 30-minute session, which is always a challenge. But they're not on our website or anything. They're not a downloadable resource, but I could share them with people if they're particularly interested. They're obviously very, very tailored to our local picture, though. It's very much local knowledge and what we have. I suppose the thing that kind of came out of those sessions that we did, because they're a bit out of date as well. We haven't done it for a few years now. But what people might be interested in is looking at our website at the resources there are on food poverty there, because they all developed out of the training, really. People said, it'd be useful to be able to refer, to have information about free school meals there. So we've added information about free school meals, or, people weren't aware of Healthy Start vouchers. So we've included info on Healthy Start vouchers. So we have two main resources. One is about food banks specifically. So it's aimed at professionals. And again, even then, we try and incorporate all sorts of stuff about, have you thought about advice instead of food banks? Have you thought about the local discretionary social fund instead of food banks? So there's that page. And then there is a much more general just advice for people in need. And that includes all the stuff I was talking about above, but also things like, white goods, people saying, well, it's no good, me telling somebody about eating on a budget if they haven't got a cooker and a fridge. So we've included some information about how to source cookers and fridges cheap. So they might be worth having a look at, I would say. But I can, if there is something specifically around training, I can send that. I don't know how much sense it would make on its own, though.
I was thinking one of the things that might be useful to point out is that on the Food Power website, we've got a map of all the alliances who are registered with the program. And on it, there's info about each of the different alliances, as well as contact information for people joining them. So hopefully this is okay with you, Emily, because you put your contact detail in the presentation as well. But if someone was particularly interested in one of those trainings, they could get in touch with you directly about that. Does that sound okay?
Yes, definitely. And I've also included some links on the presentation and my email address. So when I don't think you can click, as you're looking at it as we went, but I know you put the presentations up when you put the webcast up. So people are welcome to look through that as well.
Great. Thank you. That's exactly right. So if you go to the resources page on the Food Power website, you can see the past 2 webinars we've done. And this recording will be up there probably later today or tomorrow. And it's got the sound and the slides so you can lift any of the contact information or the links, even if you can't click on them directly. I think that wraps it up for all of our questions. So just the final, just because I'm just going to hammer home a few more of these deadlines to let you know, the deadline for applying to be a pilot project for empowering experts by experience is this Friday. The deadline for applying for funding on a project to maximize family incomes in your area is the 21st of February. And we're also holding our next webinar on the 21st of February, and that's going to be on measuring the extent of food poverty at the local level and mapping the local response. And we'll have speakers from other alliances, again, who have created indicators that can be easily shared and understood and produced maps. So for those of you who are interested in that topic in particular, we'll be kind of deep diving into that a bit more because we know it's something that people are quite curious about, and about the question of longevity and how to create things like the navigation tool that Brighton and Hove have that can be used over a long period of time and don't need updating necessarily. We thought Brighton and Hove's has been such an interesting example, and as Mari was saying, have inspired a lot of alliances, which is why it was so great to hear from Emily about how their work has evolved over the time, and then how another area like Moray is taking it and running with it in new directions. So it was really, really great to have the combo of both of you with us today. Also, I'd just like to say that we're putting together webinars about once a month right now. And so if anyone has a particular topic they're really keen on, or think that there's a certain speaker that would be good to have on, or someone that you think would be helpful for more people to hear from, please do let us know, because we really want to make sure the webinars are about hearing from alliances work they've already been doing and can be shared with others. So as per usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the webinar formally, but we'll just leave the chat up for a few more minutes. So if anyone wants to have a quick back and forth with anyone else, that will stay open for a few moments. But thank you again for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day.